right. First, some housekeeping. I live in Ojai. How many people have been to Ojai? So hippie, funky town. Who lives there? I'm one of them. I'm getting dressed this morning, and I'm putting on gray slacks. I've worn Levi's for the last 20 years almost every single day. And my wife is like, what the hell are you doing? And I'm like, I'm going into the city today. I'm dressing up. So I'm feeling a little like I don't have my Superman suit on wearing gray slacks, but that's okay. I actually want to start with a story. It's November of 1990, and I've landed my dream job. I've just moved to California. I've been living in Sweden. I hadn't seen the sun in 2 years. And I get a job with Nike. And my job is called Econ, and it's Nike spelled backwards. And I'm supposed to know the brand forwards and backwards, and I'm in a market, and there's 35 of us around the world. And our whole job is to be the eyes and ears of the brand. I lucked out. I get Southern California's territory. I'm living in Manhattan Beach. Like, life is good. I joined at kind of an odd time because it was a huge sales meeting, the annual sales meeting that was going to happen 2 weeks later. So they're like, hey, normally onboarding's 3 weeks. Come up. We're going to send you to shoe school. So I fly up to Beaverton, Oregon. I'm with the research lab. I'm learning everything you don't want to know about footwear. Durometers and midsoles, compression molded EVA, what type of lasting, what's web tech and fiber tech. I come back home, and I decided to do a store clinic. And a big part of my job was to go to stores before they opened or after they closed to talk about new product. So I'm in La Cañada at the Sports Chalet. All the managers are there. It's 9:30. How many people have worked retail? Who wants to listen to anybody after store closing? Exactly. I decided in that next hour, I am going to regurgitate everything I learned about shoes in 1 hour. So I'm totally immune to what's going on in the audience. I'm just like, okay, I'm just like diarrhea of the mouth on tech. I pick up my bags. Walk to the car, and Mary, who's my boss, who's a couple years older, I said, hey, what did you think? She goes, that was terrible. I said, what? She's like, dude, that was awful. And I was like, what do you mean? I just shared everything I knew about footwear. And she's like, you talked about sneakers and tees. Go to the sales meeting next week in Arizona, and then tell me what you learned in that talk. So I go to sales meeting. And the product managers, I go, the first one, it's on running. It's not even about the shoe as much. They're talking about Prefontaine and the sole of Prefontaine and all these things. They're showing these videos where I got goosebumps. And I'm thinking to myself, I get it. Like, our job is to bottle inspiration and bring that forth while everyone else can make sneakers and tees. So the power of emotion is a narrative that I want to share with you today. And a couple things. I'm not a Marxist. I don't believe in competition. And which is interesting because you guys are in a world where it's just laden with competition. I actually believe the best brands, even at Nike, believe it or not, we didn't spend a lot of time on competition. We were like, what's our purpose? To provide inspiration, innovation to every athlete. Who do we serve? The athlete. And let's just be maniacally focused on that. So once again, I'm not, in your industry in particular, I think it's really fascinating is that you can get super intoxicated with who's doing what. And I think for us, my learning lesson was that is just do what you can do great and make sure you own that. As Christopher alluded to, I spent 30 years working at some pretty interesting brands. I got lucky in landing at Nike because I think in many ways it was just an incredible learning journey for me. I learned about power of emotion. I learned about culture. Certainly learned about product. But they each offered something different, and I think the key thing I learned in Power of Motion, and by the way, I've also worked with a lot of smaller brands, there's no bias on emotion. Whether you're 50 billion, 500K, 50 million, emotion is relevant to every one of you in this audience. Before I get into the power of emotion, I want to say one thing. What I'm going to share after this slide is irrelevant if you don't have a great product. You have to have a great product. And I think a lot of times what we think is, hey, we have a product, we can dress it up, and we'll do a marketing campaign or whatever, and that's how you build a brand, and then you take off. The reality is you have to have a really beautiful product. And it has to start there. And that's the owning the rational. The emotional comes in this next phase. You're not going to be able to read this, so I'll paraphrase. This whole idea is about widening the lens. So Scott Bedbury was the CMO at Nike when I got there. He then went on to be the CMO at Starbucks. The guy's kind of like Midas in terms of how to build things. He has this thought, and I'm going to paraphrase this. God forbid any company that thinks its product is wider, brighter, faster than the competition, and you stop there. Because where you see greatness, the consumer sees parity. We've all lived that, right? You think you have a great product, and you just stop there. It's like, all right, I got a great product, like the world's going to come to me. The reality is you have to create that connection before the content, the old Peter Block line, connection before content. And so the opportunity in Power of Emotion is just how do you widen the lens to capture not only the rational, but also the emotional. So how do you do this? I spent 30 years working with really interesting brands, once again, big and small. Actually, let me take a step back. I'll tell you this quick story. Any of you ever, you know what horsemanship is? Horse whisper stuff? So my wife, I'm not a rider. My wife is obsessed with Buck Brenneman, that whole thing. If you haven't seen the movie Buck, you got to see it. It's a horse movie about people. In fact, it's deeply about empathy. Anyways, my wife years ago says, hey, let's go to this event and just pretend you're going to have a good time. I said, okay. And so it's a horse event with Buck Brenneman. And he's in this ring, and there's a big, huge arena. And this woman, the trailer backs up to the ring, and this woman brings out this crazy horse. And she brings it into the ring. Let's go to the lead line. The horse is going apeshit in the ring. She runs out of the ring, and Buck's sitting in the middle of the ring. And in 10 minutes, the horse has done what we call join up. He's walking around the ring, and the horse is on his right shoulder, just following him around. He never touched the horse. Never touched the horse. But he understood the essence of what was happening. Like, he didn't get caught up in the kind of chaos and the vortex of just doing stuff. But he tried to understand what is happening here. And I share that because in many ways, for me in the world of branding, I literally, I was a terrible economics student. That was my major, like 80s, greed was good. That's what you're supposed to do. I took philosophy classes to counter my anxiety over economics. And I just became obsessed with philosophy. So in many ways, what I want to share with you is if you really take the time to get down to the brass tacks, and this is one way of doing it. By the way, you all have illustrated there's plenty of ways to grow a brand, so I'm not saying this is the Holy Grail. I'm saying it's one unique way. But if you think about it, or as I think about it, it comes down to a burning question. And I learned this from an amazing mentor years ago. You ask yourself this: what does the world need that you are most uniquely qualified to deliver? Once again, what does the world need, or you could say, what does my community need that I am most uniquely qualified to deliver? So here's why this question matters. First of all, you have to sense what's happening. You mentioned, Gretzky, go to where the puck is going, go to where the puck is going, not to where it's been. A big part of any great brand is sensing what's happening. When I was an econ at Nike, I'd have to send these monthly reports. In the first monthly report, I was like, hey, black shoes are selling well. And they're like, yeah, we know that, dipshit. Like, what's happening? What's happening in the marketplace? And it was like sensing. It was like, hey, a lot of people are playing basketball outdoors. I know that sounds crazy right now, but in the early 90s, outdoor hoop was like, it was really defined to certain pockets of the states. It wasn't as rampant as it is now. So I was like, hey, I'm seeing outdoor hoop really kind of pick up, especially down here in the beach cities. Okay, so sensing is a huge piece of this. But the other thing is, what does the world or your community need? What is that answering? It actually is making you relevant because you're answering a need in the marketplace versus just coming in. I think a lot of times we create product without really understanding what's the need. And then the last thing is just what are you uniquely qualified to deliver? What's your niche or your niche? I have a friend who wrote this great piece called Aim for Icebergs, and it's where a lot of people only see the small tip of something. They'll say, oh, it's nothing, but below is abundance, right? And you see something, Sufferfest beer, like you saw something in a niche, and you're like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. RX bar. is another great example. That gentleman saw something. And everyone's like, it's another bar in the industry. Turned out to be pretty popular. But the key is sensing, being relevant, and then answering a specific niche. So let me break this down in terms of just actual stories that I have. So when I got to, it was actually the fall of 2014, I got a call from a recruiter. I'm living in Ojai, and she says, hey, I've got an opportunity for you to consider. I said, I'm not interested. She goes, I haven't even told you the company. I said, I'm not interested. I have my own company. I'm good. I don't want to go anywhere. She says, it's Lululemon. Verbatim, my response was, hell no. Because in the fall of 2014, it was listed as a brand that wouldn't exist in 2015. There was a proxy battle going on with the original founder. They were just coming out of a monstrous recall. And it just sounded like a shitstorm to me. I was like, why would I go to that thing? She's like, do me a favor, just go up to Vancouver. So I said, okay, I'll go up to Vancouver. I went up, and I'm always trying to be really attuned to the vibration of a culture when I go in. Like, I just want to be like, oh, you can tell a lot by a place you walk in, like whether it's thriving or not. And I'm walking in, I'm like, this is going to be a morgue. These places people are going to be down and out. And I walked in, and it was full of life. And I was like, do you guys not know, like, Rome is burning? No one likes your brand. Like, there's all this negativity, but it was really vibrant. And so I called my wife that night, and I said, hey, I don't have the answer, but I feel there's something here bigger than black stretchy pants. Like, I was like, I can't tell you what it is, but I think there's something bigger than black stretchy pants. And so we spent a lot of time asking this very question. What does the world need most that we're most uniquely qualified to deliver? And a couple things that are interesting in that journey. The board be like, we need to sign big athletes. We're getting into the men's business. We need big name athletes and campaigns. And I was like, that sounds a lot like Nike. And I know they would love for us to go into that zone because then they'll just beat the crap out of us. So we kind of paused on that idea. And then everyone was like, yoga is super limiting. Super limiting. We're offering products in running, swimming, and bike and everything else. Like, who cares about yoga? So then we said, okay, got it. And then we just sat as a group, and we actually partnered with an amazing woman named Mira Kadura out of Portland, Oregon. She's got an all-female agency called Red & Co. And she was the creative force at Nike behind the Girl Effect, if you've ever seen that, which is, I think, hands down, some of the best work Nike's done. And what we got to this place was this. What the world needs most, that we are most uniquely qualified to deliver, is not doing yoga, but what it means to be yoga. And that's a really simple shift, right? Like, you would think at first glance, like, what? Do yoga, be yoga. But the idea of being yoga, we did a lot of cultural studies with youth. They really there was a spiritual element that was a strong undercurrent. And so for us, it was like a waterfall had just kind of appeared for us to kind of be in a state of flow, because we're like, holy shit, like, this gives us the answers. Like, we can play. So every deliberation we did was informed by, does it speak to being yoga? We had an onboarding and development program that was, at the time, was landmark. And I had never taken it, so I can't really speak to it. But we said, God, if we're being yoga, why would we not create our own leadership and development program inspired by yoga and what it means to be yoga? And so that's what we did. We created a program called Mindful On. Then we launched a campaign called This Is Yoga. And not one of the images was anybody on a mat. There wasn't nothing in a yoga studio. There was a grime rapper from East LA. There was a Vogue dance group out of Mexico City. There was a surfer. But the whole idea was to create this snap for people to understand that we wanted to capture the emotion of what it meant to be yoga. Okay, so once again, it's a simple question, but when answered well, it actually allows you to play from a place of strength and organically in who you are and be in that state of flow. Smaller example. My kids actually I have two girls now in college, one at UBC and actually one at UCLA, which is down the street. But they went to a small school in Ojai founded by Krishnamurti. And Krishnamurti, for those you don't know, was one of the most iconic philosophers of the last century. He lived in Ojai for 70 years. He was the chosen one. And he created a school. He had one in Ojai, one in London, and one in India. In fact, senior year, you go to India for 2 months, which is really, it kind of throws education on its head. So the school was talking to me like, hey, there's 8 private schools in Ojai. There's 8,000 people in Ojai. 8 private schools, 8,000 people. And they were like, how do we separate from the herd? And by the way, that's the whole premise of this, is how do you separate from the herd? And so we were talking and we said, what are we sensing? Like, what does the world need most? And what we really kind of tapped into in Krishnamurti's work, but also culturally, was it's become a courageous act to love who you are. You know? I mean, you can go to school and we can all learn and be in the books, and man, that's product. Like, product is king. You got to deliver in that. But actually, how do we learn? And what are we learning? And so the whole premise of the school was this idea of discovering your effortless self. And that was the positioning of the school and the motion. And so now if you look at the school and everything they do around communication, social, programming, it's all built around the idea of discovering your effortless self. And once again, tapping into the power of emotion based off of a simple inquiry. When you have that idea, that purpose statement, the why, I mean, a lot of people talk about Simon Sinek. He's a brilliant dude. He was actually a Lululemon ambassador. We spent a lot of time together. When you can establish that why and you answer that question, that's the red thread that needs to live in every deliberation. You have to ask yourself, going back to Lululemon, how does what we're doing speak to the idea of being yoga? It doesn't. Don't do it. It's actually a grounding force that makes conversations objective. You know, so you're like, okay, I have this big idea. We're going to, go to Coachella. Okay, what are we going to do at Coachella? I don't want to show up. Well, how does that speak to being yoga? It doesn't. Okay, we're not going to do it. But going back to the leadership and development work, we're going to devise our own program called Mindful On that all is inspired by yoga. Check, you get it. So the red thread is how it works with brand, PR, digital marketing, onboarding, digital response, every deliberation. That kind of lives. And so the irony of this whole thing is what I've learned the most in this journey isn't about building a brand for the external world. And I'll tell one last story. Years ago, I was having lunch with Yvon Chouinard, who's the founder of Patagonia. And we're sitting there talking, and he's like, Duke, everyone focuses externally in the world. If you're a brand, you're like, all right, what am I going to do to excite the external world, my guests and my consumers? He said, the most important thing is, how do you excite your internal culture? And it starts with clarity around why you exist. And so the hidden gem of the power of emotion is not necessarily that you can connect with your audience and your guest in the most unique way. That's true. But the beauty of it is you have people coming to work every day with clarity on why they're coming to work with a sense of purpose that ignites their soul. And I can tell you, like, flat out, when we launched the idea of changing the purpose statement at Lululemon, it was elevating the world from mediocrity to greatness. I would say all the time, I have no idea what that means. It sounds great and big, but if I go back to my desk, I'm not sure what that suggests. But as soon as we launched this idea of elevating the world through the power of practice, and practice as the idea of being yoga, man, it was like this raucous sense of wonder and even whimsy kind of thing entered in people's lives in terms of how to hold the brand. So once again, I think there's so many ways to build something powerful, and I'm like the guy who is not courageous to go on my own. And so I applaud a lot of you who have the courage to do something. I'm the guy who likes to jump into a pre-existing tribe to figure it out. So I give a lot of credit. Actually, it's amazing what you do. I'm sitting in the background. It's just been a day of nutrition for me to listen in. There's a lot of ways to grow a brand, a lot of amazing ways. But I can tell you flat out, one thing you might wish to consider is the power of emotion through one fundamental question. And it works for any industry, any size, any culture. Thank you. We did a couple things. One is we actually tapped into a culture insight group that shared what they view, actually Vice Media, which is obviously a huge youth brand in terms of, I think they're the largest youth media entity in the world. But they have an amazing insight crew. And what they gave us was 3 key insights or mindsets that they felt were driving youth. And so we tapped into the first one, which is like, who am I here to be? A lot of youth were in this midst of trying to discover like this burning question, like, what's my role or what's my purpose, which is kind of angst-filled, but that was one thing. So it started with really tapping into like, what does the world need? And that gave us, okay, how can we make the world more mindful, present? We were looking at the world just as a group and brainstorming sessions, and what we were seeing is just the lack of unity, the lack of empathy, the lack of compassion, the lack of understanding, lack of honesty. And we just felt like that was a big cultural norm, and that was just an internal brainstorm session. And then when it came to the actual idea of shifting from doing yoga to being yoga, that was actually a third party that helped us. I think sometimes it's hard when you're in the weeds every day, and you also want to have the answer. I've seen that all the time. I want the answer like now. And it took time. It took us probably literally almost 4 months between initiating it to the time of we actually had an idea. But this external partner was really good at sharing, I think, the nexus between what we were seeing culturally and what we were great as a brand, which was yoga. Being known as yoga. Like you say Lululemon, you think one word. Well, maybe you think black stretch pants or whatever, but it's yoga. And so it was the confluence of those 2 things that really helped. And I should add, it seems pretty simple, but you've identified it can be challenging, and I think that's where I go back to, I think the best brand leaders are about sensing. What are you not always seeing, but what are you sensing? And that actually gives you a big head up or a way up. At the end of it, when we launched, I have to say, it was so moving. We had 8,000 people. I saw people crying, and I walked off stage, and people were like, you don't really seem like buoyant and joyous. I was like, I feel like a salmon who just went upstream, spawned, and then I just died. Because the internal gauntlet to get people was hard. But there's a great behavioral, John Cotter at Harvard is behavioral changes. And you could read this one book, but I'll distill it to 1 page, 3 words: see, feel, change. When you can get people to see something, they're more likely to feel it, and then they can shift. And so I spent all my energy in getting them I couldn't say be yoga, because some people on the executive team are like, what? What does that mean? Okay, cool. I need to bring that to life to see it. I was also super patient. I enrolled a lot of people. I actually did a lot of bottom-up enrollment, truthfully, so that there was a real beautiful vibration from people within the community. We're decentralized at Lululemon, so it actually helped as well. And what I mean by that, it's not command and control. We create the conditions, and then people play. Like if you run the Santa Monica store, that's your store. I have no say in what you do in that store. So I had to enroll people, and I started at the bottom up. And then I was actually just really honest. I was like, if we don't do this, and I asked them what was important. Flow is a really beautiful theme for me. I ask it all the time when I was in the meetings. I would be like, my first question for my weekly meeting, are we in the state of flow? No. Okay, what's going on? Oh, we're lacking clarity in this. Cool. But to me, flow is everything in the working environment. So a red thread is, once you have an idea of what you want to stand for, so let's take Nike. It's inspiration and innovation. Then everything you do, your every action and behavior needs to speak to that. So if you do a press launch, it better be innovative and it better speak to innovation. If you post on social, it better be innovative and inspiration. And so it's just making sure that whatever you stand for, you can feel and see in everything you're doing. Someone talked about it actually a little bit earlier. I can't remember who, but that's the red thread. And that's when you know it's working. Because truthfully, it's one thing to create a really cool presentation, you launch a campaign, then you go back to your day-to-day, and it's like, like, I don't see it manifesting here or living here or breathing here. And so that's really the body of that work. Does that make sense? You don't want to know. It's funny, I read so many eclectic things. Like, I'm really into Buddhism right now. So I'm obsessed with Thich Nhat Hanh and how my wife's a practicing yogi Buddhist, so that helps a lot. But I'll go all over the map. Like, I love Buckminster Fuller. Challenging. Has anyone heard the book I Ching? I tried that. I swear to God, I read the first page 12 times, and I was like, I have no idea what this is about. But that was super fascinating, just in the premise that if you really want to understand China, like I Ching is their way of being based off of numerical system. So I go all over the map. And I try to get things that are left and right, truthfully. Like even on Twitter, I'll share I'm an Ojai. I'm in the left. But I love listening to what's going on the far right, you know? I think it's important to be connected to that. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.